May the words of my mouth and thoughts of my heart be acceptable before you, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Shalom all, and welcome to our open forum. I am, of course, your host, Ariel Tzadok. You find me online at KosherTorah.com. We're in the middle of our discussions on the holidays. And we are now going to discuss the holiday of Sukkot. As the wise words of our sages have said, Devar bi'ito ma tov. Everything in its time is good. And I say that because we are just now, in counting the days, putting ourselves in the calendar here, days away from the Sukkot holiday. And for the record, it is booming and thundering out here in Tellico Plains, Tennessee tonight. So, may the rains of cleansing be upon us, just to start things out. It is the year 2014. This Wednesday night for Sukkot, there's going to be a lunar eclipse, and we're going to have a blood moon. And you all know what that means, don't you? Oh, where's that Darth Vader dun-dun-dun horror movie music that we need right now to build up crescendo? You know what it means? Does it play the Jeopardy music? Da-da-da-da. Well, I'm going to tell you what it means. It means that the powers of astronomy and the movements of the sun and the earth and the moon are all going like they are supposed to. Baruch Hashem, thank God for that. Yeah, that silence is about all what else it means. So for all of those of you who want to look at this as an ominous sign for doom and gloom, you know something, go look at whatever signs you want. Yes, I know it's written in the Talmud. Thank you very much. But many of the rabbis will even admit that many of these things are superstitions, ideas and beliefs. If you want to ascribe fear to things like that, go for it. If that's the little bubble in which you want to live, fine. But then you're going to miss the message of what the holiday Sukkot is all about. Now, Sukkot, booths. We all are very familiar with the tradition. 5 days after Yom Kippur, on the full moon of the month of Tishrei, the Bible, Leviticus, chapter 23, tells us you've got to go out and live in the booths for 7 days, right? And you rejoice before God. It is for two historical reasons. Number one, as the Bible says, that we will remember that we lived in booths when we went forth from Egypt. Which, if you actually think about it, no, we didn't. No one had any booths or Sukkot out in the desert for 40 years. They lived in tents. And, as the Talmud makes very clear in the distinction and definition of what a Sukkah is, it certainly was no tent. So therefore, today, one does not fulfill the commandment to go out into a booth by setting up their tents. Alright? I don't care if you got your tent at Walmart, Amazon, EMS, REI, or any of the other fancy places. No. Very different. Very different indeed. But what is the holiday? Remember, it's going forth from Egypt. Got it. Okay? We all remember, every holiday is remembrance going forth from Egypt. Going forth from Egypt was the ancient Israelite declaration of independence. The Torah being its constitution, if you will. And therefore, everything was to remind us of the act of freedom. And freedom is always remembered by living under the hand of God. And that really is, in my opinion, probably one of the most important messages of life. We have no guarantees and promises with anything in life. We all know that. People can live the most decent, righteous, holy, pious life and still crummy things happen. Right? We all know these things. So then when it says, remember going forth from Egypt, The remembrance is the first of the 10 commandments. I am Hashem your God who brought you forth from the land of Egypt, in the house of bondage. First commandment is freedom. That's why, for example, the concept of freedom as embraced in Americanism, not necessarily in the modern politics of the United States, but in what the founding fathers of the Declaration of Independence wanted, was this biblical concept of freedom. Freedom meaning responsibility, independence, and everybody being able to stand on their own 2 feet and standing arm in arm, hand in hand with one's brothers and sisters. That's freedom. So when we proclaim the message of going forth from Egypt, going out to a booth, the message was to remember that as independent and free and therefore responsible human beings, part of that definition includes recognizing and remembering, remember how it is written. Comes from the British philosopher John Locke. It was inscribed in the American Declaration of Independence. We have inalienable rights endowed in us by our Creator. Right? Those are universal truths. Well, that's right out of the Torah. We have those inalienable rights. And I'm not talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness stuff. I'm talking about the responsibility to remember the first commandment. Which is what? Oh, I told you the second half of it about freedom. What was the first? Anochi Hashem Elokecha. To remember that Hashem is God. I think that religion gets in the way when it really tries to personify God and make God some kind of a person with whom we're supposed to have a relationship. That mentality really opens up the door to all kinds of idolatrous thinking. We have to recognize God far beyond the limitations of any such personifications. God is the consciousness, the will, the knowledge, everything. All right, it's the being of creation. It so transcends anything that we could ever understand in our limited knowledge. That is God. That's why it says, Anochi Yud-Ke Vav-Ke Elohecha. Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, active being. Remember what the name means. That's our God and nothing else. And as such, that's what we have to remember. Okay, I get the philosophical concept, right? I remember it, and to help me remember it, I'm going to actually write it on a poster and put it in front of me in my wall here. Remember that God is transcendent. Got it, thank you. I remember, right? Wrong. Because it's not a philosophical, intellectual concept. What it has to be is your life. When it says to remember going forth, to remember God, what that means is you have to live it. How do I live it? What am I supposed to do? I mean, think about it. Forget thinking. You got to do. Torah is all about doing. It's not enough that you just remember the concept. You have to actually live it. If I were to say to you, in the words of Sledgehammer, trust me, I know what I'm doing. It's not enough for you to acknowledge that. You have to actually do it. When God says we have to place Him as God, we have to do it. How? Putting ourselves in His hands. Right now, as I said, it's booming thunder and rain. Well, I have to put myself in God's hands. Now, I really don't anticipate that my house is going to blow away in a rainstorm. But it has been known that our satellite internet connection can be disrupted by the weather. It's happened before, and if it happens, it happens. All I can do is trust in God and accept whatever God gives. Do you understand this concept? I just gave it to you in a very practical example. Well, God wants us to get that message and to apply it. Leave your houses. Leave the comfort of your homes and go outside into nature and trust in God for a cycle, period, a week. And that is why the Sukkah is not a tent. A Sukkah, let me restart again. A tent protects you from the elements. You can have special tents that protect you from this extreme cold, from the extreme heat. Well, a Sukkah doesn't really protect you from anything. A Sukkah has to be part of nature. Granted, it's supposed to be of solid walls, but what's important about it is the roof. The roof has to be of all natural materials, which you can still see through the stars through them. That is what makes it a sukkah. And the laws about how to have a kosher sukkah are very detailed. The rabbis are very meticulous so that people will get the message. So you can go online and do image searches of sukkahs. You'll see many of them are all made with wooden walls. Here in North America, many of them are made with canvas walls. But the canvas can't be blowing around in the wind. It has to be very taut so that it's very solid. Either way is totally fine. But the point, again, is the roof has to be see-through. And that's the point. God says, go out to the sukkah. We're technically, if possible, supposed to literally live there, eat there, sleep there, do everything there. If it were at all possible to take your electricity out there, bring your computer out there, do your work out there, eat and drink out there, that's what it's supposed to do. And trust in God that all will turn out okay. And you see, that's just the way it is. That's what a sukkah is supposed to be. We're going to get into the mystical details of it as we proceed. But anyway, the holiday, as it was observed in biblical times, actually included its actual significance, one which is lost to us today. And that is that the biblical holiday of Sukkot, as we know, happened in the fall. This was the celebration of the harvest. That's why later in the Torah it is called Hag HaAsif, the time of gathering. Right? It was the gathering of the harvest. That is why this was considered a very, very celebratory holiday. Everybody from around the country was supposed to come to Jerusalem to celebrate, because everybody had something to give thanks for. The agricultural connection to the land. All the holidays were about that, whether it was Passover, whether it was Shavuot, or now Sukkot. All of them were all connected to the land. The purpose of that is to remind us of our natural connection to nature, to nature's creator, Elohim, and that Yud-Keh Vav-Keh is Elohim, the whole fundamental message of the Torah. We are part of nature. Living, especially now in our urban technological societies, we tend to forget that. The fact that we have electric lighting makes us forget the cycles of day and night. We can pretty much change anything we want, live in any illusion or parallel reality that we want. If it's too hot, you put on the air conditioning. If it's too cold, click a button and turn on the heat. We are removed from nature. And because we remove ourselves naturally from nature, the parallel consequences are that psychologically, emotionally, and mentally, we also remove ourselves from nature. And that is why today human morality is so bankrupt. Because there is no more a moral compass, which at one time was natural, because we're so disconnected from nature. And again, people cannot think any more clearly of what is natural, because their minds and thoughts are so disconnected from nature that they can therefore conceive of, believe in anything. Because everything can make sense within the limitations of the mind when it is not bound by the realities of nature. get back to nature. That's what the holiday is all about. It was a time when the people would thank God for nature, for nature's course, for the cycles of the sun and the moon, whether they were eclipsed or not, whether they understood or not. They thanked God for the fact that their storehouses were full, and they came to give thanks. One of the great expressions of thanks at this time was the offering of water, the great water offering. They would pour out the water upon the altar, because this was a sign of blessing and thanks to God. Because remember, in the Middle East, they still have what we today call rainy seasons. Okay? They had it dry during the spring and summer and wet during the fall, winter. And therefore, at the Sukkot holiday, we offer a prayer for the rain. Well, here in Tennessee, apparently we're getting it a wee bit early. But we live in a different environment than the Holy Land. But there, they pray for the rain. And as a sign of giving thanks for the rain, they would bring the water. And this was called Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the gathering of the water for the giving of the rain water. So, to this day, even though that observance is no longer done, obviously we don't have a temple and an altar to do that, to this very day, during the intermediate days of the Sukkot holiday, people still have parties. They still rejoice and give thanks to God for the good things that God gives us. And that is what is so important to remember. So, the holiday has, of course, evolved over many a time. I want to share with you some of the ideas. Of course, in the Torah, in the Bible, aside from the commandment of the Sukkah, we were commanded to take of the products of the land. The products of the good trees, the branches of palms, the boughs of leafy trees, and the willows of the brook. 4 different items. They were all representative of the 4 different types of growths in the land. And they were literally waved before God as a sign of thanks. And those are what we call the 4 minim. Now, they would also march around the altar saying prayers. The priests would also be offering sacrifices for all humanity during this time. For you see, Sukkot wasn't a Jewish holiday or an Israelite holiday. It was a time for the Israelite nation to give thanks to God for nature and to pray for God to be merciful upon His entire world. All of us, all nations. This was the first universal gathering. And that helps us understand why the Messianic prophecy, which is actually the prophet's reading for the Sukkot holiday from the book of Zechariah chapter 14, where it states that after Messiah comes, defeats the enemies of Jerusalem, all who survive are going to be commanded by God to observe the holiday of Sukkot. Representative ambassadors of all the nations of the world are going to have to travel every year to Jerusalem at this time to build a Sukkah and celebrate before God. Why? Answer is simple. So as to teach us to show appreciation for the good that we have. And it's not enough that you just acknowledge it by nodding your head, yeah, thanks a lot. No. You got to show that you have true faith in God. And showing true faith in God isn't what you say, it's what you do. And that is what it's all about. So, during the time when the temple stood, the people would march around the altar They would be saying prayers and giving thanks and saying the words Hoshiana, Hoshiana. Save us, bless us, bless us. And then there is this, we still do those prayers to this very day around the altar in the synagogue, the teva as we would call it. And there's a very interesting prayer, which most people don't understand. They have the words, Ana Hoshiana, Ana V'Hu Hoshiana. Ana Hoshiana. Ana is usually translated as please save us. And then it says, Ana V'Hu Hoshiana. What is V'Hu? And him? Please and him save us? If you look at it, it just doesn't really translate right. And that's because most people don't understand that the words Ana or Ani V'Hu, Ani V'Hu, I and he save us. No. People don't recognize that the word Ani V'Hu are not read correctly. They're actually two triad holy names from the 72 triad name of God. Ani is Aleph, Nun, Yud, Anuyo. And the second, V'Hu, is actually Wa, Hewa. Alright? These two triads were actually meditative chants, which were used to invoke a state of deeper trance, to bring one into a state of divine inspiration. And it is said with all the hoopla of the singing and the dancing during the Beit Shoeva celebrations, people going around in circles going Anu, Yo, Wa, Kewa, etc. and so on, that this is the time of great and profound divine inspiration and revelation. And those traditions still exist amongst those who know them to this day. Indeed, the nature of the swirling around to chants hasn't been lost to Judaism. Indeed, it was even adopted about the 8th, 9th centuries or something by groups of righteous Muslims who became known as the Sufi. And even Avraham ben Rambam writes in his book, Speak of the Hashem, recognition that many of their traditions and ours are identical. And yes, somebody here in Texas mentioning that even the Native Americans here, they come from an ancient line which I'm convinced is Israelite, and I'm certain that they have a tradition relating to that as well. Now that we've understood the holiday within its context, let's move on. Because you see, as time goes on, as centuries go by, understandings evolve. And that's exactly, indeed, what happened with Sukkot. So you see, you can go into mystical writings as they developed in Europe, the writings of the like of Rabbi Recanati, the writings of the like later of Rabbi David ben Zimra, famous as the Radbaz. We've mentioned these rabbis in our Shar HaMitzvot class. They are of a school of rabbis who have endeavored to explain the commandments of the Torah from Kabbalistic points of view. And I believe it was the Recanati, so I remember reading, I believe it was in his name, stating that it was either he or one of the great sages had an interesting dream during Sukkot, wherein which an angelic guide told him in a dream that he was committing sacrilege. How? By separating the final letter He, from God's name, Yud-Keh, Vav-Keh. Appalled, shocked, he said, "How am I doing this?" And he said, or he was told, by not holding the four species that were supposed to wave before God together. And this began a revelation and understanding that the four species, the lulav, the etrog, the hadas, and the arava, all corresponded specifically to letters of God's name. You have the etrog, the lulav, the hadassim, and the aravot, all corresponding to the letters. The etrog corresponding, of course, to the malchut. That's why if you've ever seen anybody who observes the commandments in this respect, they hold the lulav, which is the big long palm branch, the hadassim, which is the myrtle, and the aravot, which is the willow. Those three are held together in your right hand, and the etrog is held in the left. These are the four species, correct. Now, according to this dream by the Recanati, when you are waving these before Hashem, you have to hold all four together so that their energies literally overlap and intertwine with one another. They mingle. And that is a very important and significant Kabbalistic practice. That when you're waving the four species, you are supposed to put your hands together and actually physically touch the species. This is more than, again, just something physical. Again, it's the concept and the idea of uniting the letters of God's name. Now, practically speaking, for those who do not have their prayers memorized, they have to hold the four species with a prayer book. You try juggling all three of those together and see how well you can do it. So it becomes an interesting juggling act of how people can do that. And unfortunately, to tell you how to do it, it's not something easily done just in audio that I can do in this type of forum. But anyway, go ask your local rabbi. Hopefully he'll be able to tell you. Now, just as a quick note, in regards to the waving of the lulav and the etrog, the Ashkenazi tradition, that's the Eastern European tradition, if I'm not mistaken, they stand still and they literally just change the direction of the lulav and the etrog. You're supposed to wave it north, south, east, west, up and down. Alright? So if I'm not mistaken, I've seen the Ashkenazis, they literally shake it over their shoulders and things like that. Whereas in the Sephardic Kabbalistic tradition, you actually physically turn to each of the directions of the compass. The entire body turns with it. And the entire movements is supposed to be up and down slow, like a wave function. And there's all kinds of meditations involved with this. But I'm jumping the gun. Let's move on. Back in the 1500s, Rabbi David ibn Zimra wrote in his book on the commandments, the Radbaz, an understanding of the Sukkah itself. He made us realize that the word Sukkah, spelled Samech, Vav, Kaf, Hey, you got the letters of God's name in there. I should say the numerical value of the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, 26, that's the Kaf and the Vav. And the Samech and the Hey correspond or add up to 65, which is the name Adonai. The name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is the name of God Transcendent, and Elohim is the name of God in nature. So or Adonai. So we say that these two are a representation of the essence and transcendence of God united. What we call in the language of the Sefirot, Tiferet and Malchut. So he says, right in the word Sukkah, you have the union of what we'll call the higher and lower spiritual and physical, invisible and visible worlds. Okay, isn't that a philosophical concept though? I mean, isn't that just an idea? No, it's not. It's an evolution and development of what we've been talking about all along. What is this heaven, this Sefirat Tiferet, this higher world that we're talking about? Forget about what it says in the books. Call it nature. because we have our human way of how things have to be. You got to go to work, you got to pay the bills, you got to do what you got to do. That's living in the real world, and we trust in God that He will bless us, protect us, heal us, and prosper us. Amen. That is how we understand God as Adonai. But yet there is a power above this, the Transcendent. Call it the supernatural. The one who brought us out of Egypt. Rather unnaturally, supernaturally. That's Yud-Keh-Vav-Keh. The Sukkah is not only the concept of, but the actual realization of this integration of the higher and the lower realities. So when the Radbaz is referring to the Sukkah as being this union, this is what he is talking about. He's not just giving us a philosophical construct, he's helping us understand nature. As you know, in my many classes, I try to help you understand what I consider energetic reality. All is energy and everything is energy. Even modern science knows we live in a world made up of mass. But the mass of the universe, for the most part, is invisible. It's missing. You call it dark matter. Not that it's dark as in Darth Vader dark, but rather they don't see it, they don't understand it. It's an entire parallel reality. And we have to live in alignment with that reality, whether or not we see it or sense it with our five senses. But we have greater senses, and we don't cultivate them or use them. Going out into the Sukkah, learning to recognize that Yud-Keh-Vav-Keh is God, requires of us a cultivation of the sixth sense, the psychic senses, the intuitive awareness. This is why, when the temple stood, the people endeavored to go into their psychic trances, why they used their chants and everything else. They didn't want to think about philosophically knowing that this is the union of this and that. They wanted to experience it personally. And that's what it was all about. Granted, they didn't call it by all the same names that the later Kabbalists do, but they wanted to experience it nevertheless. This has always been then the understanding of what the Sukkah is. It is, and always has been, energy. But again, things evolve. And now when we go into the Torah of the Ariel and of Rabbi Chaim Vital, just as a historical note, Rabbi David Ibn Zimmer, who we've been talking about here, he lived in Egypt in about 1550s, 1560s. And I don't know if it has been historically verified, but I think it has been, that one of his young students was a young Ashkenazi Sephardi man, young man by the name of Isaac Luria. Isaac Luria then later moved to Israel and of course became known as the famous Kabbalist, the Ariel. A lot of the Kabbalah that the Ari learned, he learned from the Radbaz. The Radbaz was a master Kabbalist. He understood these things. And then of course Rabbi the Ariel taught his famous student Chaim Vital, and thus we have the teachings today. So you see, Rabbi Chaim Vital, whether it came from the Ariel, Eliyahu Navi, his imagination, or HaKodesh, whatever, put together for us a very, very beautiful embellishment of this whole concept of this integration and unity, which does not begin on Sukkot, but is in this process. Rabbi Chaim Vital uses the metaphors of Adam and Eve and the Sephirotic faces corresponding to Tiferet and Malchut called Zeranpin and Nanok, the female, uses them interchangeably. And he references the Bible stories we know, Adam and Eve, and a very curious Talmudic metaphor, where in which it states that when Adam and Eve were created, they were created as a single entity with two faces sharing a single spine. So essentially they were created back to back. Now if you want to think about that in Siamese twins literalness, it's kind of weird. But remember, this is all symbolic language. It's a reference to the relationship of the parallel worlds of which we are talking about. That they existed in a state in which they existed, but they were distinct and separate. There was no concept of integration and balance. So what does God do? Well, using the biblical example, when God wanted to bring Eve to Adam, it says he put him to sleep. And then it opened up his rib, took out a rib and made Eve. So according to the teaching of the Ari, he says that he put Adam to sleep, in this case Zeranpin, Teferet. Has all kinds of symbolisms with what that means. We've elaborated on those symbolisms in the secret lessons of the holiday of Purim, and from the Shar Kavanot, and that's available in our Arizal and the Shmona Sharim series. And on Rosh Hashanah, this was the time that Zah was going to be put to sleep, and during the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Zah and Milk, Adam and Eve, would be separated sephira by sephira. And I know I'm literally condensing 50 pages of the Shar Kavanot to make it real simple and brief. But on Yom Kippur, the two of them would then come face to face. And they would then be able to ascend together to join. But yet, their union has not yet happened. First, they have to go under the chuppah to be married. So, following the symbolic metaphors, what is the chuppah, which would then be the marriage canopy for Zah and Nok? The answer, of course, is the Sukkah. The Sukkah becomes the chuppah. And therefore, during this period, the female face has to be brought into complete harmony and balance with the male face, which is a symbolic way of saying that the entire power of what we call heaven has to be brought down to earth. This channeling, this conduit flow of energy needs a vessel. So through the power of our mind, which taps into the parallel higher dimensions through the realms of thought and emotion, creates visualizations in the mind, and then that has to be reflected into this physical world through an act, in which the energy is physically projected onto. During Yom Kippur, the negative energy was projected onto the goat, the scapegoat. And that thing was full of negative energy, for real. Well, now you're taking the positive construct energy of the mind, and where do you project it? Into the four species, the Arba Minim. Yud Ke Vav Ke, Recanati's dream. And that is why you have to physically turn with your body to each and every corner of the compass. And you're moving in a wave function, projecting thoughts in your mind corresponding to Sefirot and Olamot, projecting energies into the world through the actual physical conduit of these four representative agricultural icons in your hand. And that is what you're doing. So, this entire movement is a moving, it's actually, if you do your breathing right, like the Chinese would call a Qigong meditation. It's not where you're stretching your muscles and moving, but the actual moving is fully out with your hands and back. Moving with your shoulders down, everything. It's, for those of you who know the expression of how you push out your hands, it's a Qigong form. This is the same thing you're doing when you're moving back and forth with the lulav and the etrog, alright? And you're reciting your specific prayers as you're doing this. Somebody here in Texas getting it right about the light going forth and the light coming back, in and out, breathing, movement. They did this in their own way in the days of the temple. But being that that was lost, this is how it is. It's going in and out, up, down, back, forth, movement. You're breathing into it. You want to get a little bit more graphic? It's a little bit more than just the breathing. It's not happening in the mouth. The energy's happening, where when we talk about union. All right? It's that grinding action of the yesods. You're merging back and forth, doing it. I don't want to get graphics. Hopefully you get what I mean. Now, to continue with an understanding of the symbols and the metaphors, something that the Ariel also foresaw. With every chuppah, aren't you supposed to have guests? Of course. So therefore, we have to invite guests to our sukkah. Now, I'm not talking about my buddies. I'm talking about archetypal guests, psychic guests, spiritual guests. Each day of the holiday corresponds to one of the 7 Sephirot, which is that relationship between the higher and the lower worlds, and it's the merging of the two. So therefore, in each one of the days is corresponding to each of the Sephirot, and archetypally, symbolically speaking, we have associated and attributed many of the great biblical personages to each of these attributes. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, Joseph, David. And each night then we symbolically invite one of them into the sukkah with us. And it's a beautiful tradition. Are they really there with you? Only if you believe it. But it's the concept of orienting your mind to the energetic realities. Remember, Sephirot are constructs of the mind that represent the flow of energy. So if you concentrate on the energy, that is what you're supposed to be doing. You're going out into nature. You're balancing and aligning the harmonies. And then you're corresponding again to each of the Sephirot in its time. You're moving with the flow, with the shaking of the lulav and the etrog. You're actually eating in the sukkah, sleeping in the sukkah, at least you're supposed to. And believe it or not, the law states, husband and wife, don't forget to be intimate, just like Za'anok in the sukkah. Go out there in the middle of the night, leave the kids inside. You don't need me to tell you the rest. And that is the secret of how these things are and what they mean. So ultimately, the development of the holiday has come to help us understand and to see a beautiful progression of thought. Because all of the Kabbalistic secrets of the Ari that he is talking about here are no different from everything that was observed biblically with the focus on agriculture. But being that the focus on agriculture has been lost due to our loss of an agrarian society, the same concepts and ideas have now been philosophized, given an archetypal form. And that is actually and exactly what we are supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be remembering there is a higher reality. That we have to live and integrate with that higher reality. And there are subtle details of that reality which we weave together in a dance of breath, in a dance of movement, in a dance of connecting the actual tools with the energies that they represent. We do this, if you can, in the Sukkah. And if not, it doesn't matter. Because, remember, if you can build a sukkah, then do so. And if you can't, well, I guess you can. What can I say? If you can acquire the 4 species, then that's great to do so. Indeed, acquiring the 4 species in many communities around the world throughout the centuries was an extremely difficult task. Sometimes to get a lulav branch or an etrog fruit was next to impossible. You would have literally entire communities saving up a lot of money so they could buy 1 set of these and have them brought from wherever they came from. And an entire community, therefore, would share the commandment. Today, these species are readily available. They're inexpensive. The ones that are sold in the public markets, in the Jewish religious markets, that are usually all checked by rabbis, so there's no question that they meet all the traditional standards as must be applied to them. And for those who want to experience this, well, if you are obviously Jewish, you have an obligation to do so. The obligation to sit in the sukkah and to wave the lulav and the etrog, the 4 minim, only apply to Jewish men. It doesn't mean women can't do it, but women are not obligated to do it. That's the difference. Indeed, in the Sephardic tradition, women would always wave the lulav and the etrog just like the men. They'd even recite a blessing on it. There is nothing wrong with that. There is a tradition that the Sephardic women do not recite the blessing to sit in the sukkah, but Ashkenazi women do. Neither one is wrong, neither one is right. People just follow whatever traditions and customs that they have. But speaking about some practical expressions of the observance of the holiday, as I said, you are supposed to actually live in the sukkah. Well, a point that is made clear in all of the law code commentaries is that under many circumstances that might not be practical or feasible. Like I've been mentioning throughout this class, at this time, tonight, we are having thunder and lightning storms. It's raining out. Many of you might remember that old song from the 60s, "Oh, don't let the rain come down. My roof's got a hole in it and I might drown." I play that song every now and then. But my sukkah has got openings in the sky. And everything gets all wet. And as I mentioned, I believe before we went online, I'm proud to say that my sukkah, which is outside my house now, is standing strong, thank God. So it's handling everything. But, okay, practically speaking, what happens if it's raining? Do you got to go out there because you got to be so religious? You got to stand out there? Well, the law states that on the first night of the holiday, you should recite the opening prayers called the Kiddush and eat at least a morsel of bread to show an association with the sukkah. If you can. I mean, if it's pouring, raining, sometimes you can't do that. But practically speaking, if you can, it's good to do. And needless to say, if it's at all feasible, it should be done. Eating, if you have the practical ability, eat your breakfast and your lunch and your dinner, every meal, eat in the sukkah. Now, some people are strict not to eat anything or drink even anything outside the sukkah. We're not so strict. You want to have a cup of tea or anything else or a snack, don't worry about it. I mean, don't get crazy like so many religious people do. They really miss the point of what the holiday is supposed to be by doing that. Oh, and by the way, if it is raining, you can put like a plastic cover over your sukkah to keep it dry, and then of course when the rain passes, remove it. That's not a problem. Just don't do that on the holiday itself, but during the intermediate days and the like, it's totally fine. But getting back to the sukkah. Eating, it's good to do when you can. How about sleeping? The law is very meticulous that you're supposed to sleep every night in the sukkah. Even naps you're supposed to take in the sukkah. I can tell you at times, like when I lived in California, when we had great weather out there, we had beds out there. We used to live out there. We used to literally take the electricity, bring it out, put the computers out there. We lived out there. Unfortunately, our weather here in Tennessee is not always like that. As you will find in the law codes, they make very clear reference to Europe, North America, and other areas in northern hemispheres, where in which, due to this being the time of fall, not only do you have rain, you can also have significantly cold nights. I believe just recently, Chicago had a flurries of snow, right, on Yom Kippur itself. Now, when it gets down into the uncomfortable range, you are actually exempt from sleeping in the sukkah. And indeed, the tradition here in the United States amongst the Orthodox, it has been for the longest time until the extremists took over, was that really nobody ever bothered to sleep in the sukkah. And I have mixed feelings with that. To this very day, I still have cots, and it would be a great idea to camp out into the sukkah. It's beautiful out there. I cannot tell you how enjoyable nights I've had out in the sukkah under the stars. I remember once I was in the sleeping bag, and it started to just pitter-patter rain. So I just, it was a mummy bag, so you have the head covering, and I just put it over the head, and I rolled over and went back to sleep. Luckily, it didn't rain any harder. I would have floated out, but no. If it is uncomfortable, it is too cold and the like, you are exempt from sleeping in the sukkah. This might actually apply to the vast majority of those who are listening to our KosherTorah messages. And if it is, know that there is certain unequivocal foundation to permit sleeping in the house. Now, you want another little interesting detail? What happens if, remember, the men are the ones who are obligated to do this, not the women. The women, if they want to go out and join their hubbies out in the sukkah and, whoopee it up, by all means, go for it. That's considered a mitzvah, good thing to do. But let's say the woman says, I'm not going out there. I'm going to stay inside in my bed. And then she turns to her husband and says, I miss you, honey. I wish you could sleep with me. Now, a lot of women don't want to admit, but yeah, that's the way they really feel. And in my opinion, rightfully so. Well, guess what? According to the law, that is considered reason enough to exempt the man from the sukkah. And if his wife wants him by her side, it is a mitzvah to be by her than to be in the sukkah. How can that be? Well, remember what the whole sukkah is all about. Remember the whole point. Union, integration, energy. It's not a time for conflict and strife. It's a time for balance and harmony. These are some of the practical things that you have to remember. So don't get caught up in the minutiae of the details. If you look at the law codes for the laws of Sukkah, what is considered an acceptable form of each of the four species, how to, and not how to, build the Sukkah. My gosh, it goes on and gets involved in great detail. Something that's all well and good. Every religious scholar, of course, has to know those things. But for the layman, don't worry about it. Just go with the energy flow. Now, speaking about energy, when does this all conclude? Well, the seventh and final day of Sukkot is not the eighth day, which is a separate holiday called Shemini Atzeret. In Israel, that's also the day called Simchat Torah. But the seventh day of the holiday, we do 7 special going around the ark, going around the teva in the synagogue. This is a special day called Hoshana Rabbah. We say that on Rosh Hashanah, your fate is signed. On Yom Kippur, it is delivered. But on it is sealed. And on Hoshana Rabbah, it is delivered. Signed, sealed, delivered. You have until Hoshana Rabbah to get things right, just in case you didn't get things right by Yom Kippur. The Ariel goes into great detail to explain how this is the time when the doors close. This is the time when the energies of Za and the Nok get ready to merge. The merging and the union is actually on Shemini Atzeret. There's a pregnancy that gets happening at that time. The child is then born at Passover, but that's another story. But here at Hoshana Rabbah, this is the time. Everything now goes out. The Ariel brings down a very interesting tradition. He says if you go out on the night of Hoshana Rabbah into the clear moonlight, look and see if you can see the shadow of your head in the moonlight. He says if you do, that's a good sign. Now he's not telling you to actually look at your physical shadow, but your psychic shadow. He's trying to help you, if you will, look with your eyes closed to see the truth of the energetic balance and harmony that we are working so hard to be a conduit. That is what we are. When we are observing the commandments, the reason why we have to physically do this is because we are the tool. We are the conduit for the flow of energy from the higher universes to come through mind and emotion and to translate through our bodies, which merges all the dimensions, into physicality in this world. And we therefore become the conduit and the agent of blessing for the natural world. On Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, we focused on bringing blessing to the intelligent species. Now, it's for all nature, all the worlds, all the balances, all the harmonies. That is what the Sukkah is for. That is what the 4 species is for. That is what the walking around is for. The meditations are for. That's Sukkot. As you can see, Sukkot has many faces, many different layers of meaning that have evolved and developed over centuries. But they are not disconjointed, disconnected. They are all the living flow of the living energy of the living God in our live universe. So my prayer is that we should all be so blessed to properly observe in mind, in heart, and those who can indeed, upon these things, to bring balance and harmony from the invisible to the visible, and the visible to the invisible, spiritual to physical, physical to spiritual, Zah to Nok, Nok to Zah, or Choser, or Yashar, all the rest. Whatever sets of metaphors and symbolisms we want to use to fulfill the words, may He who makes peace in His high heavens make peace upon us. To have balance, to have harmony, and all good things. I bless you all that we should all have a happy holiday. Remember, make this special. Enjoy it. If you can even wear special clothing, then do so. Right? Special time, make it so. Thanks again all for joining me. I'm your host, Ariel Bar Tzadok, KosherTorah.com. God bless. Good night. Hag Sameach and Shalom. 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 Sameach